Hi everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to another Hobby Hour tutorial. Today let's go back to the Leviathan box set and paint a Tyranid Prime. After cleaning the model, I assembled everything except for the wings. I drilled a hole into the peg in each wing and glued a piece of wire with super glue. I stuck each wing into a cork to make painting easier. I gave the model a subtle zenithal style prime, beginning with a coat of gray primer all over, and then when that was dry, I sprayed some Citadel Wraithbone from the sides and the top. Since the wings weren't attached to the model, I tried spraying from where I thought the top would be. You could temporarily attach the wings before spraying and remove them after, if you prefer. I used some skeleton Horde and base coated all the skin areas. Next I used some Bonewhite from Vallejo game color and dry brushed the skin. I like using a cheap craft brush for dry brushing. Just grab a little paint, then using a lot of pressure wipe it on a paper towel until there's barely any paint left on the brush. Drag it across the model and it will highlight all the raised areas. Don't worry if the paint looks a little rough or spotty, we'll smooth that out later. Next it's time to paint the scales with a mix of 3 parts Flesh Terror's Red and 1 part Black Templar. Work on one section at a time and try to keep the paint even. I want the head spike to have a blended effect, so we're going to use a technique called feathering. Apply some paint at the base of the spike, then quickly rinse off the brush, wipe it on a paper towel, and then use the clean brush to soften the top edge of the red. I rinsed the brush off a second time and repeated the process. We'll be applying some black paint on the spike later, but we'll leave it for now. Now let's add some color to the skin using Magos purple. We're going to use the feathering technique again, so start off by painting some purple, rinse the brush, wipe it off on a paper towel, and soften the edge of the paint. What we're doing is diluting some of the paint and allowing more of the base coat color to show through, making the two colors appear to be blended. Repeat this process on both feet, the tail, and the fingers on the wings. You can make the color richer by repeating the process several times. Just allow it to dry thoroughly between layers. I applied about 4 layers of the Magos purple. Next I painted the inside of the mouth with Sigvald Burgundy. Then I painted these crack details with Gryph-Hound orange. Next I used some Cadian Fleshtone to paint the tongue, and then the membrane on the wings. While the wings were drying, I gave the tongue a coat of Magos purple. Now it's time to do some blending on the wings using Bonewhite. It's the same technique that we did previously, except with an opaque paint. Begin by painting a layer of Bonewhite on the bottom section of each wing. Quickly rinse out the brush, wipe it off on a paper towel, and then drag the brush on the edge to diffuse the color. Rinse the brush and repeat as necessary until you get a blended effect. If you make a mistake or the blending looks a little rough, that's okay, just let it dry and you can adjust it. You can even go back in the other direction with some thinned Cadian Fleshtone, or even mix the two colors together. Blending can take some practice, but keep working at it and it will all get easier. Now we're going to shade the Bonewhite sections of the wings with a mix of equal parts Reikland Flesh Shade and Lamian Medium. Apply it about halfway up the wings. Keep the layer thin and try to avoid letting it pool too much. The shade is diluted enough where you probably won't need to soften the edge, but feel free to do so if you want. Next we're going to shade the Cadian Fleshtone sections of the wings using Reikland Flesh Shade. Paint it about halfway down the wings, and just like the other areas we blended before, rinse out the brush and soften the transition. After allowing the wings to dry, I applied another shade on the Cadian Fleshtone sections, and this time it's a mix of 2 parts Reikland Flesh Shade and 1 part Carroburg Crimson. Just like before, after applying the paint, rinse out the brush and blend the edge. You can repeat this step a couple more times if you want to deepen the color. Now we're going to paint all the claws with a mix of 4 parts Black Templar and 1 part Incubi Darkness. Let's go back to that spike on the head where we blended the red, and now we'll blend in some of this black mix. Just like before, apply the paint, rinse the brush, and then blend the edge. Take some Thunderhawk blue and highlight the edges of the claws. There will be one more highlight on top of this one, so make sure the line is wide enough to accommodate it. Next, paint a thin highlight of Fenrisian gray on the edges and corners. Then I painted a few dots of white on the teeth. Next, I took some Dorn yellow and highlighted the orange areas. If you make any mistakes like I did here, just let it dry and touch up the shadow with Rhinox hide or any other dark brown. If there is any spillover on the skin areas, you can leave that for now. We'll cover it up later when we highlight the skin. Next, I painted the eyes with Dorn yellow, followed by a dot with black. Now to highlight the wings with some Cadian Fleshtone. Start on the darker sections and highlight the edges. As you work your way down, you'll reach a point where the highlight disappears, and that's a good place to stop. The paint dried pretty fast, so I went back on top of that first highlight and painted a second layer. Work your way around the wings until all the sections are highlighted. Now take some Bonewhite and highlight the bottom sections of the wings. Thin the paint down slightly with water and start at the center of each wing. Use very light pressure so you get a faint line, then gradually increase pressure as you go down. The result should be a line that's stronger near the bottom and softer near the middle where it meets up with the Cadian Fleshtone highlight. Now for the real fun part, highlighting all the scales with Evil Sunz Scarlet. Thin down the paint slightly with some water, and paint some or all of the edges. I think the lines on the scales are a defining characteristic of Tyranids, so I like to add a few more than are sculpted on the model. It takes a little bit more time, but for me, the aesthetic is worth it. After all the red is done, it's time to do it all over again with orange. Thin down some Fire Dragon Bright with water and paint it on all the edges and corners. I tend to exaggerate the highlights on the scales a little bit more than I normally would, but you should apply as much or as little as you want. With those highlights done, it's finally time to glue on the wings. Take some pink horror and highlight the Magos purple areas from earlier. If you only did 1 or 2 layers of the purple, you may not need this highlight. It's really only needed on areas where there are 3 or more coats of Magos purple. Next, I mixed some white into the pink and added some highlights to the tongue and the other pink areas. Now take some thinned Bonewhite and touch up the skin. At this stage I'm touching up any mistakes I made earlier, and I'm also smoothing out any rough areas from dry brushing at the beginning. For the last and final step, take some Offwhite from Vallejo Game Color and highlight the edges and corners of the skin. Apply as much or as little as you want here. Generally, I like to paint more highlights near the top of the model and fewer highlights near the bottom. I glued some cork, gravel, and sand to the base with wood glue, and when that was dry, I gave the base a coat of thinned Rhinox hide, followed by a dry brush of Mournfang brown, Balor brown, and finally a light dry brush of Bonewhite. I painted the rocks with Dawnstone, shaded them with Agrax Earthshade, dry brushed with Dawnstone, and then dry brushed with a mix of Dawnstone and Bonewhite. Then I painted the edge of the base with Mournfang brown, and when that was dry, I applied some patches of static grass with superglue. And here's the finished Tyranid Prime. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and if you did, please do the thing and click that like button. Did you learn something new? Is there a technique you'd like to see in a future tutorial? Drop a comment below and I'll do my best to make it happen. There are a few more Tyranid models left in my Leviathan set, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next tutorials. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy painting.